All right, in the second half of the video, when we talked about in the last video changing your setup so that you stop chunking chips and stop laying the sod over the ball or blading it, and you wonder why you're coming down so steep, and as I mentioned, I discussed how it's part of the setup. I want to go now and talk about how the angle of attack is what you're really looking to alter by changing your setup. So let me back both of these clips up real quick just to the setup position, just to give you a quick refresher. You can see massive difference on the left. This is how chipping's typically taught. Stance is open, ball's way back in the stance, hands are way forward, and this is what a lot of golfers do because they're afraid of chunking it, then it actually makes it worse. And I'm going to show you exactly why. And then here on the right, you can see how the RotarySwing.com setup is, where we have the shaft with very little shaft, lean only about 2 degrees, which allows us to use the effective bounce of the club as we come through. So let's take a look at that. So now as I work the club back and come back through, here's where you're going to see the massive difference in the way these two golf clubs approach the ball. Just behind the ball, about 6 or 7 inches or so, the clubs are coming down at completely different angles. And the exact angles here aren't the important thing. The important thing is the difference. So on the left, we've got about 18.4 degrees. On the right, we've got 5 degrees. And that's negative angle of attack, or how steep you're coming down the ball. Obviously, if I'm coming down at 18 degrees, that club is going to dig. And so let's just focus on the left one here and watch what happens just after impact. You can see the shaft stressing here, as I mentioned in the last video, it's de-lofting the face more. And then the shaft bounces back because I came down so steep, and so the club kind of stops traveling forward in these two frames. You can see these two frames, it barely moves at all, and then kicks back up. Obviously this didn't feel very good, but that's very typical for how a lot of people chip. They put the ball way back in their stance, they chop down on it and hope for the best. Now if you look at the one on the right, where I'm coming down only about 5 degrees, you can see that the club just glides right through the turf and keeps on moving like nothing ever happened. And that's how you keep from hitting fat chip shots, is being able to use the bounce. And the bounce, just the trailing edge, how far the trailing edge of the wedge is lower than the leading edge. And on a typical lob, this is a 60-degree wedge. On a typical wedge, they're 8 to 10 degrees. This one has a little bit less than that, but it doesn't matter because I have plenty of bounce to spare here. So coming down at 5 degrees, if your wedge has 12 degrees of bounce, you still got 7 degrees to play with before you ever worry about that leading edge digging into the ground like you see here on the left. Coming down steep at 18 degrees, which again, it's a very typical, the way chipping is taught by a lot of golf instructors is to get into this setup position. There's not a wedge in the world that has 18 degrees of bounce. So you're going to dig into the ground, and so you've got to hope that you come down absolutely perfectly on top of that ball and time it just right. Whereas here on the right, I can actually hit a couple inches behind the ball and it will still skid right through and not like nothing ever happened. Now, of course, I'll get some grass between the ball and the face, but it's way better than laying the sod over it. So, again, go back and look at the video in the description so that you can learn more about the bounce angle, how to change your setup so that you stop hitting fat chip shots and you learn how to use the bounce properly.